When trauma becomes a credibility problem, mental health, institutional harm, and the justice system. Mental Health Awareness Week in 2026 runs from the 11th to the 17th of May with the theme Action. This episode reframes that theme directly. Action must include justice reform, participation, protection, and the end of institutional practices that turn trauma into evidence against the survivor. So, in this episode today, this is Silence Screams Loud Strength, Unmasking Justice, and I am your host, Samantha. We're going to dive deep. I am the founder of SafeChain, the framework that talks about this very topic every day. So let's talk about trauma. When trauma becomes a credibility problem, mental health institutes, institutional harm, and the justice system itself. This is not a soft episode, okay? This is an episode about slogans. This is not an episode about telling people to breathe, journal, speak up, and be kind, while the very systems around them are crushing them. This is Mental Health Awareness Week, but mental health happens every day. Therefore, we are moving past just the week. The awareness is not enough because there is a truth we need to confront. Many people are not mentally unwell because they failed to cope. They are mentally unwell because they were forced to survive systems that were never designed to protect them in the first place. They were traumatized by abuse, then re-traumatized by disbelief, then exhausted by procedure, then financially destroyed by delay, then emotionally punished for reacting to injustice. And once they reacted, once they cried, once they shocked, once they became angry, once their voices trembled, once they could no longer speak in a neat, controlled language, the system prevails. Their trauma was used against them, not as evidence of harm, but as evidence of inability. That is the danger part. When a survivor says, "This happened to me," the system should ask, what does the evidence show? What records exist? What pattern is visible? What financial trail exists? What safeguarding duty was triggered? What participation protection was required? Instead, often, and too often, the system asks, is she emotionally unstable? Or is she stable? Or is she a difficult person? Is she high conflict? Is she too traumatized to be believed? And that is where mental health becomes weaponized, because the person who has suffered harm is no longer examined through the lens of protection. They are examined through the lens of suspicion. Their distress becomes the story. Their evidence disappears. Their reaction becomes louder than the abuse that caused it in the first place. and suddenly the survivor is not treated as a witness to harm. They are treated as a problem. Let me say this clearly. Trauma is not proof that someone is lying. Distress is not proof that someone is irrational. Anger is not proof that someone is dangerous. Disassociation is not proof that someone does not care. Exhaustion is not proof that someone is uncooperative. Sometimes the most distressed person in the room is the person who has seen the truth most clearly. Sometimes the person who sounds emotional is emotional because the evidence has been ignored for too long. Sometimes the person who is called difficult is simply refusing to disappear. And sometimes the person who is labeled unstable is the one still trying to hold the system accountable. Mental health cannot be discussed honestly without discussing power, because mental health is not only clinical, it is also social, it is legal, it is financial, it is institutional. It is what happens when someone is forced to fight for safety while being treated as disturbance. This is what happens when courtrooms reward composure over truth. It is what happens when polished advocacy is believed over lived reality. It is what happens when the perpetrator arrives with a team of legal strategy, documents, confidence, and institutional familiarity, while the survivor arrives exhausted, fighting and frightened, financially depleted, traumatized, and expecting to perform credibility under pressure. This is not equality of arms. This is theater, because trauma becomes the credible trap within family proceedings. This is why safe chain exists, because safeguarding cannot end at awareness. Safeguarding cannot end with posters. Safeguarding cannot end with a policy on a website. Safeguarding must become operational. It must enter the courtroom process. It must enter financial remedy proceedings. It must enter housing decisions. It must enter banking systems. It must enter credit reporting. It must enter legal regulations. It must enter judicial training. It must enter the actual architecture of power. Because if a person can be abused financially, controlled, displaced, disbelieved, procedurally exhausted, and then psychologically labeled for reacting to all of it, then we do not have safeguarding systems in place. We have performance of concern. Mental Health Awareness Week is asking people to take action. So, let this be the action. Stop pathologizing survivors. Stop confusing trauma responses with unreliability. Stop allowing procedural imbalance to masquerade as neutrality. Stop treating emotional distress as a reason to ignore evidence. Stop calling women high conflict when they are fighting for safety, property, children, dignity, and truth. Stop rewarding the calmness of those who benefit from harm while punishing the emotional reality of those who survived it. And start asking the real questions. What did the system do to this person? And not, why is she like this? But what happened to her? What evidence was ignored? What safeguardings were missed? What safeguards were missed? What power imbalance was allowed to continue? What procedural protection failed? What institutional actors benefited from her exhaustion? What could justice look like if the system actually listened? Because survival has a sound. Sometimes it sounds like calm, sometimes it sounds broken, sometimes it sounds angry, sometimes it sounds repetitive, sometimes it sounds like someone telling the same story again and again because nobody heard them the first time. That is not instability. That is the human nervous system trying to make truth visible. So, to every survivor listening, you are not weak because this affected you. You are not unreliable because you cried. You are not irrational because you became angry. You are not difficult because you kept going. You are traumatized, and your trauma responses is not your shame. Your survival is not a diagnosis. Your voice still matters. Your evidence still matters. Your life still matters. And the institutions listening, mental health awareness without institutional accountability is not enough. It is not enough to tell people to speak up if the moment they speak up, you use their pain to discredit them. It is not enough to say, be kind, while allowing systems to be cruel. It is not enough to promote well-being while ignoring the machinery that produces harm. The next stage of mental health justice must be structural. It must be procedural. It must be evidential. It must be human rights. It must be human rights based. It must be protective and protect participation. It must protect credibility. It must protect traumatized persons from being erased by the very symptoms of what they survived. This is not awareness. This is survival. This is not a slogan. This is a demand. And this is the work of Samantha, a survivor of domestic abuse and still fighting and speaking through silent screams, loud strength, and unmasking justice. And my voice needs to be heard. And this is Self Chain. Order my book and listen to the podcast and join the movement through the Intelligence Hub. Let's march together and demand justice. We all deserve to be heard. Our voices matter. Our story matters. But the solution needs to come now. Awareness is no longer enough. We need a solution now.